concept of a stable reality. In your view, what stabilizes reality? Do you think that it's preordained by something, or is it the collective awareness of humanity itself that agrees on a collective reality?
Okay, I think we got two different subjects going here. One of them, when I mentioned the stable reality, I mentioned that in terms of this being an evolved reality,
Mhm.
and that the rule set had to be such that it would be stable. Okay, and that means that this this idea of you start with a set of initial conditions and a rule set, and the rule set just says how these initial conditions can change, right? So what we start with, at least what physicists think we start with, the initial conditions are a ball of plasma, very high energy, very high temperature, high pressure, ball of plasma. And when the run buttons hit, the rule set starts to tell it how that's going to change. Well, it's real high pressure, so it's going to expand, and it's going to do this. And as it expands, it cools. And as it cools, you get suns and planets and stuff and so on. You end up with this universe and so on. It has to evolve through the whole evolution of the universe to the evolution of our solar system to the evolution of us. Well, that took what we're now probably at about 5.5 billion years, okay, from the Big Bang, something like that. I'm kind of making it up, but it's something out in that neighborhood. Well, that's a lot of evolution for a rule set to work on initial conditions. My thought is that they probably said, all right, digital Big Bang, take one, and they worked for a while, and after a couple 100,000 years, the whole thing went to hell, it blew up, everything, flew away from each other, and it all died from lack of energy or something, Well, okay, digital Big Bang, take two. So they fiddle with the rule set a little bit and say, all right, we need a little more gravity, and we need a little less of this and that. All right, change the rule set, take two. And I suspect they did a whole lot of those takes, trial and error, before they got a rule set that enabled our reality to be stable long enough to produce choice makers in the virtual reality that were interesting for individuated unit of consciousness to play. So the consciousness makes the choices for those choice makers. So that needed to be a very stable reality, which means it was a very, very precise, balanced, very specific rule set that allowed that stability. Okay, now we see this in several ways. One way is there's this thing called the anthropomorphic universe, or no, the anthropic principle, or some sort of thing in physics. And what they're talking about is that there's a half a dozen fundamental constants in that we've discovered, and they are numbers, constants, that they run out maybe 10, 12 decimal places. And what they found out is if you even change that last decimal place out in the 12th decimal place, the whole thing would go to hell. It would, the universe would no longer be stable, and it would all fall apart. So we've got like a half a dozen of these constants. To me, that says that this thing was fine tuned over a lot of, big digital bang, take 10,000, and let's just shift that one decimal place and see if we can get something that'll be stable enough to get what we want out of it. So that was, that anthropic principle to me is just a trial and error, an evolution of the rule set, if you like. The rule set evolved, you throw away what didn't work, you keep what does work, and you keep building on it. And they had about a half a dozen different parameters they were trying to all make work together and balance just right so that the thing worked. So that's one way that we know that this happens. Another, I've gone to dozens of other physical reality kind of places like this. And I call that with a tight rule set, where there's a rule set that it specifies all the interactions such that it's like ours. It makes it seem what we would call physical, as opposed to, say, the dream reality that has a very loose rule set, and it's not all that physical. It's sort of physical, but there's a lot of things you can do there that you can't do here, like fly and teleport and other things. So this tight rule set, and the places that I've gone are surprisingly similar as to the fundamental rule sets. The basic physics seems to be very similar place to place. Now, the things that evolved there, they can be very different. because different choices were made in different environments. So what actually came out of it can be wildly different. But the basic physics of how it works is very similar. And I think that's because it's really hard to make a simulation like this that is stable. There's not like you can do that 1,000 different ways. It really takes a lot of precision tuning to get one to be stable. So it's not something that can just be done, oh, this way or that way, or let's do one, some other way. It's hard to do. So basically, when the system got something that worked, don't mess with it. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. Things will evolve differently in it, but so they're similar. So that's the second thing. So you got the anthropic principle and the fact that I've seen this multiple times over and over, that it's a very similar kind of physics or science, if you will. I mean, that's what science is. Science digs out nuggets of the rule set. Oh, here's a little piece of the rule set. We call that scientific fact. That's what science is. So that's what I talked about a stable reality. But now this thing you were talking about with group consciousness is a different sort of thing. There is such thing as group consciousness. Any group that at your being level, you feel that you're a part of. Okay, it could be your religion, it could be where you work, it could be that you're male or female, it could be where you live. Everybody who lives in New York, you may have, if you identify yourself as I'm a New Yorker, then you're part of the collective consciousness of New York. Or even down to, I belong to the First Baptist Church of Cycle Hill or something. Well, that's a group. And if you are a member of that, then you're part of the collective consciousness of that little organization, right down to the family. So we have collective consciousness that is basically made up of all the consciousnesses that are in a group that we define ourselves as a part of. And when we do that, we kind of log on to, if you will, we open up our communications to that collective consciousness, and we begin to take on some of the characteristics of that collective consciousness, and the collective consciousness gets modified a little bit by taking us on. But it modifies just a little because it's something really big, and we modify more because we're something little compared to it. So that's the collective consciousness. And if you probably not true now, but if you go back 30 or 40 years ago, you could be spotted as an IBM employee just by the color shirt you wore, the way your hair was combed, the way you were dressed, right. Because everybody in IBM, looked like they were in a uniform, even though there was no uniform, but they were very, they had to have, a blue shirt, and they had to do this, and I remember back in the 50s when my dad was always complaining about having to wear a hat. It was where he worked required him to wear a hat. And it really annoyed him that he had to wear this hat, but he wore the hat anyway because it was required. So that's part of the collective consciousness, and it does affect us. Now, we identify ourselves as human. All right, there's a human collective consciousness, and Carl Jung called these things archetypes. Okay, so the Jungian view of this is there's these archetypes, and they're at the human level, they're at the, corporate level, whatever. You get archetypes. Well, all archetype is a collective consciousness that everybody kind of logs on, opens up their communication lines, if you will, to each other, and you get this thing. Well, also another example of that would be a mob. Okay, you take a bunch of angry people and put them together, and the mob together feed on each other's anger, and that mob will do things that none of the individuals would ever do on their own. Right. And you can take a bunch of people who are full of love and caring and peace, and they think about others, and they're not full of ego and fear. And if you hang around them, it just pulls you right up. You feel good around them. It's a nice space. It's pleasant, and you like to spend more time there, and you tend to act a little bit more like them. So we get affected by our collective consciousness. That's why 10 years ago, 100,000 people were lining up at stores at 4 o'clock in the morning with the expectations of getting a Beanie Baby. Right. Why did they need to do that? Well, because there was so much buzz in people's minds about Beanie Babies. And if you kind of bought into that collective consciousness of being on the front edge of fashion or toys or whatever else, then you just got sucked right into that collective consciousness to where you had to have one, even though that having to have one was totally irrational.
Right.
It's just part of the collective consciousness that that creates fads. So that's collective consciousness that we are a part of. But if we are in a group but do not identify ourselves with it, we work for IBM. Oh, we wear the blue shirt and we do the rest of it. Well, we don't like it. Like my dad, he wore the hat, but he didn't want to wear the hat. So if we don't identify with it, then we're not a part of it, and it doesn't influence us, and we don't influence it. We may go along with it and do it because the job requires it, but we're not really on board. So then this doesn't mean you can work at IBM and not be part of the IBM collective consciousness, but it's more difficult. Your job is not so much fun because you now are, you have a second persona. You're a guerrilla fighter. You've got this life going on the side, and then you got this one going on at work.
Covert.
Yeah, it's a covert kind of thing. So that's kind of the way it is with collective consciousness. Is that sort of thing.
The stable reality part, the reason why I want to get into that is that does the stable reality shape the evolution of the human special, I'm not sure what the right word is, special collective consciousness?
Yeah.
Or does the human species collective consciousness shape the stable reality? What I mean by that is, let me clarify just a bit.
Yeah.
I am sure you're familiar with Toltec. That for them it's a matter of assemblage point, where the assemblage point is located in their energy bodies is why we all have a homogeneous way of viewing the world, is that we all share a certain consciousness, but that can be shifted consciously in fact. Mm-hmm. Now if a collective of individuated beings shifted their consciousness collectively, would that make a new stable reality, or would it?
Yeah. Okay, I see what you mean. No, I think we touched on this a little earlier too. Yeah, so the rule set is a fixed rule set that's required to keep the virtual reality together. So, so that all of the suns don't blow up and whatever, and it just, the whole thing, the virtual reality is like the props and the backgrounds in a play, right? It's all the stuff that sets the tone in the play. So it's the trees and the water and the clouds and the rain and the earthquakes and all the stuff there. That's part of the virtual reality. And that rule set can't be changed much, because if you change it, it falls apart. It won't work. Okay. So that part of the rule set is not easily changed, but it can evolve into different things. You can't just change it because everybody has a different idea. Okay, now, we don't want any more earthquakes. All right, if you have everybody on the planet decides they don't want any more earthquakes, what that would do is it lowers the probability of having an earthquake. But it doesn't necessarily make earthquakes go away entirely. It just lowers the probability that an earthquake is going to happen. So that's what group mind can do. And healing works the same way. If you get 20 people together and they all try to heal someone, they're more effective. Right. Because we have this thing in our reality that our intent modifies future probability. So in that way, it seems like we are changing the rule set. All right, we're going to get rid of earthquakes. Well, what you're going to do is suppress earthquakes because you're making them less probable. But if there's some part down in the earth that's just weak and then the magma's starting to come up and whatever, and the probability that erupts in an earthquake is about 10 million to 1, well, you may suppress it all the way down to just 100 to 1, but it's still likely to happen at 100 to 1. You see, you've just changed the probability. So you don't necessarily change the rule set, but you change the way the rule set is applied to things that have uncertainty. So whether an earthquake happens, there's a certain amount of uncertainty involved in that. And we can modify that uncertainty with our minds. So yes, we can manipulate to some degree about what happens here and how it happens just from our thoughts. There was a thing called the Maharishi effect. If you Google Maharishi effect, you'll find that there were thousands of people, I think, involved in TM meditation with the Maharishi University, who focused their intent on lowering the crime rate I believe, in Washington, D.C. And they were able to do that very successfully to a very good statistical, level of merit. They did it. So when they'd work on it, the statistics for crime just would go down. When they stopped, they would go back up. And when they did it, they go back down. So they did it enough that it was clear they were having an effect. So that's the effect of intent, just on something like the crime rate, not a specific thing of somebody doing a particular crime, but just the crime rate. They, it's peace and love and no crime, don't, respect other people. It was all that sort of thing was going out there, and it lowers the crime rate. So yes, we have an effect over what happens here, but mostly it's an effect over the choices that other people are making. We can have an effect over things like earthquakes too, but if the thing's got to bust because that's what the rule set says, its probability goes way high, and we can't affect that enough to make it not happen. But we can also do the opposite. If we are full of angst and we're full of anger and we're full of upset and we worry about the future and we think it's all going to suck and it's going to be terrible and horrible and et cetera, now that mindset that sees everything as a calamity, everything is apocalyptic, is going to create an earthquake that wouldn't have necessarily come otherwise, because now they're raising the probability of apocalyptic, that's not the right word,
Apocalyptic.
Yeah. Apocalyptic things happening. Yeah. So you've just raised that probability of those kinds of things happening because there's a lot of people thinking that that's what's going on. Right. So now, yes, so we can affect things, but it's not that we just change the rule set. What we change is the probability of something manifesting. So the way it works is that anything that is new, anything that hasn't happened yet, the way it happens, the way it gets resolved is from a random draw from the probability distribution of the possibilities. So if there are a whole set of possibilities, let's say that the mantle's going to give here and the magma's going to come up and it's going to cause a volcano or it's going to cause an earthquake or something. Okay, and that's one of the possibilities. But there's probably another 100 probabilities. Well, that mantle doesn't. What it does is it melts it and other stuff falls in on top of it and seals the hole. That's another it's another possibility. So you got all these possibilities, and each one has a certain probability. Okay, so the one that causes the volcano or the earthquake, that's got this probability, and the one that stops it from happening has got another probability. So we say, let's say there's 100 different things that are possible, each one with a different probability. Well, we take a random draw from that probability distribution. Now, that random draw doesn't mean we randomly draw one of the possibilities. It means we randomly draw from that probability distribution, which means the things that are more probable are more likely to get drawn from that random draw. So that's what happens. That's how we get an earthquake or we don't get an earthquake, because that random draw is taken, and that's the way the picture now is going to render the virtual reality that way. Okay, so that's how it works. And we can modify those probabilities in that distribution is what we're doing. But sometimes you'll get that random draw and it'll take something that was not very probable at all, but you just happened to snag that. It was 1 in a million that you'd get it, but you got it. And that's what happens. So it's not that we can control things with our mind, but we can influence things. We can kind of adjust things, making them better or making them worse. So right now, people, you say, what do you think's going on, about what's going on today, the way you opened this up? Well, there's a whole lot of people with a lot of negative attitudes, a lot of anger, a lot of fear, a lot of worry, and basically they are contributing to the problem because of that. All that fear and worry and angst, and I see where it's going to be awful. Should we move out of the country, go live in Costa Rica? What should we do here?
In this course of this project, I talked to climatologists, all sorts of people who have inside tracks in the Pentagon or in the British, their version of it. I can't remember what the name of it is. Anyways, this fellow was saying that they're all preparing for these massive environmental immigration, because pretty soon that certain areas are not going to be able to support life, they're saying. So governments are preparing for all this mass migration and that kind of thing. You have all these potentialities of the
Hmm.
dramatic tragedy. I mean, the polar bears are dying off. The last white rhino. You were inundated with all this
Right.
endings, and it's a
Apocalypse. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's right. And all that helps create that.
right,
The more that we worry about it, you create what you fear. The
right,
more fear there is stirred up about that, then the more likely it's going to be that way. So it's like self-fulfilling prophecy.
right.
So that's part of what's going on here. That's why fear is never part of the solution. Fear is always a part of the problem.
Yeah.
You see, it's not like, well, fear makes me ready. It's making me, it's making me discuss moving to Costa Rica. You see, it's helping me find a solution.
Yeah.
No, the fear is the problem. The fear helps feed it. My viewpoint on how to deal with that is that stuff happens and we get to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stuff happens and we get to deal with it. Go on with your life. Do what you best you can to contribute to the solution. you know Love, caring, cooperation. Do what you can to contribute to the good side, and let everything else happen the way it happens. And when it does happen, you get to deal with it. It's just that easy. And if what does happen kills you, well, that's all right. It's
Well,
not
yeah,
that big a deal. Death isn't such a big deal. You just come back and you get to do something else some other place. And so it's better to it doesn't mean that you become a fatalist and say, oh, there's nothing can be done. I can't do anything. I'll just dig a hole, crawl in it, and wait for the end. That's wasting your opportunity. That's wasting your choices. You need to go out there. You need to get involved. You need to connect. You need to try to help people get more positive. You need to do what you can do to be a part of the solution. Digging a hole and crawling in it is part of the problem, not part of the solution. So you don't become a fatalist, you become an activist. You try to change things. But stuff happens, you get to deal with it. And it's just, it's a, you know, your creativity is how you deal with things.
yeah,
It's how how you do it. So yeah, all of this doom and gloom is just not helpful at all. And of course, our news only reports things that are negative, things that are horrible. Somebody helped a little old lady across the street today, and that doesn't make the headlines. It's just one of those things that happen. Somebody runs over 6 children, with their pickup truck, and wow, we'll hear all about that for the next 3 weeks. So it's just the way it is. And part of that isn't just dysfunction. It is dysfunction, but part of that is just our instincts. Instinctually, we are very attentive to things that might get us.
yeah,
We're very attentive to whether or not a bear lives in that cave. That's something that we are concerned about. So if there's any news about that cave and a bear, then you want to listen to it because you think that cave would make a really nice home, but you don't want to go in there if there's a bear in it. So any evidence that you can collect about whether there's a bear in there or not, you're on it. You really pay attention to it. Somebody eats a bunch of berries that nobody's seen before and they drop over dead, that's news.
right,
You say, don't eat those berries, they'll kill you. Somebody eats berries and had a good time and went on, to do something else that day, that's not news.
right,
I mean, it might be good news in the sense that now that berry is edible and you've kind of shown that it is, but basically we gravitate to bad news because that's our survival instinct wants to know those things that might happen. And, so we could get out of the way, so we can get to Costa Rica in time, so that we can do whatever it is we do to avoid. We can build a big fence around our house, and put
and a
a
big
gate
garden.
on it. Yeah, and hire a couple of guards, we can get ready. So all of that fearful stuff is just part of the problem. So
I
you
guess
just go ahead.
I guess that's where religion fills that void. Obviously, is that to go from, because obviously we have the survival thing. We have the 3 basic needs of an animal. The basic needs, which survival is at the core of that.
Right.
But there's also something that comes into play. I'm sure that's why you brought out my big toe, is to bring out what purpose is in all this. Because if you have purpose for all this, then the fear isn't the same. If you look at yourself that you're just here to have a nice life and get through it, and that's it afterwards, then you will be fear-based, I would imagine, to a large degree. But if you have an understanding that you're here to evolve consciousness, such a grandiose concept, that would change everything of how you look at being on this planet.
Sure. Not only are you here to evolve your consciousness, but you're here to help other people. You're here to be useful. You're here to give, and you're here as like one of many excursions into this virtual reality where we log on to a body. We make all the choices for the body. We learn the game. We try to evolve as much as we can. And then when our avatar dies, we go get another avatar and then we play again. Just like we do in World of Warcraft. You know, when our elf dies, well, we either resurrect that elf or we go get another one. We keep on playing the game. If there was a game and you only got to play once till your character died, it'd either be a very boring game or you wouldn't play very long. So it's not functional. You can't learn. You know, you have to learn things to be good at the game. It takes learning. Learning is cumulative. It takes a lot of experience to learn. So, you know, death is just not a big deal. When you die, that means you get to try again. You start over in a new situation where you get to apply your quality to a whole new set of choices and grow up in another way. Another chapter, same book. So, you know, okay, I'm going to stay here and the Gestapo is going to come get me one day because they know I talk to people like you, you know, and other people who, you know, who are not so in tight with the leadership these days. So they're going to come get me and, you know, shoot me or, you know, okay, you know, I'm going to do the best I can to do what I do and I'll do it as long as I can. And that's okay. It's not a fear thing that you got to go run and hide. You know, this is time to run and hide. Now, it doesn't mean I'm stupid. People have this idea that if you're fearless, you must be stupid. Fearless doesn't mean that you'll jump off a cliff. Stupid means that you'll jump off a cliff. Those two are different. You know, if you're fearless, you will be very aware of that cliff and where you are relative to it. Right. You'll be very aware that there are bears in the woods, and this is a mating season. And if you do have to go in those woods, you'll take your pepper spray and your air horn, and you'll know that you don't stare at the bear. You know, you look down or something else, or you do stare at the bear. Whatever it is that works, you know, to improve your probability of survival, you will have all that information. If you're fearful, you'll just freeze, and then you'll run, and the bear will run you down, and you'll be lunch. So fear isn't helpful anytime. Fear, it's not fear that keeps you out of the woods. You see, it's intelligence that keeps you out of the woods.
Alertness.
Yeah, alertness, being aware of your situation. So I'm not saying that you just, you know, don't care about anything. You're not alert of the world. You're just doing your stuff and the Gestapo comes get you. That's okay. It's not that way. You have to be aware. You have to be alert. You have responsibilities. I have a wife and other critters and other things to take care of. You know, those are my responsibilities. So I take all those responsibilities seriously, but I'm not sitting here in fear of what's going to happen next. If I see that things are intimately getting dangerous for the people I'm in charge of, then I will tell you something about it then. But, you know, 3 or 5 years earlier, I'm not going to be sitting here in a stew about what might happen 5 years in the future. Yeah. That just helps that bad thing happen in the future. So, you know, yeah, don't be stupid, but be fearless.
Right. And what's funny is that I think it's even biological, unless it's one of those things, those wives' tales, but that fear actually attracts the predator, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
it does. Absolutely. Fear puts out a lot of pheromones and other things that animals who have to hunt to survive, they read that stuff very, very well. And they know when you're wadded up with fear, and they know that if you're fearful, you're easy. Right. You're easy prey. They're not going to have any trouble with you at all, because the fear will make you stupid. It'll make you do all the wrong things, and it'll make you freeze up at critical times. So yeah, the fear of the fear odor that an animal will smell just says, this is simple. You know, go get that one, because that one's going to be easy. The one that doesn't exude that fear, they look at that and say, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure what that one's going to do. They may have, you know, they may pull out a big gun, you know, or something. I don't know what's going to go on with that one, because they're not afraid. So that's a different sort of thing, because the animals in the woods can't afford to get injured. They can't like go to the doc until, and get a splint or something until they get better. If they get injured, they'll probably die from the injury, because unless they're at their best, they can't feed themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Their alertness is at the being level.
yes, their alertness is at the being level. So yeah, being fearful is just not helpful. I've had any number of people saying, well, fear is what keeps me alive. No, fear isn't what keeps you alive. Good sense is what keeps you alive, and fear is what makes it less likely that you're going to stay alive.
And fear is the basis for groups in lots of cases, like mobs, right? Because in the case of a fearful group, you got bunched. Even your fear will save you from predators. In the physical realm, maybe not the biological realm,
right?
But in the physical realm, numbers will keep you safe.
Yeah, and no, there's lots of groups based on fear. Matter of fact, any group, anybody who wants to control other people knows that the way you control people is with fear. If you know of a person's fear, if you know what frightens them, you can manipulate them to dance any tune you want them to dance to. You see, so making people fearful. Oh, the boogeyman's going to get you. Oh, it's terrible. Don't go outside after dark. All these terrible things are happening. The aliens are coming. The refugees are coming. Everything is very fearful. Well, as soon as you get into that, you buy into all that fear, you can be manipulated to do anything. Any way they want you to vote, they can get you to vote that way. Any way, they want you to feel or act or do, they can get you to do that, because fear is a big handle on your back that can be easily manipulated to have you do anything. So that's why, politics is all about fear. That's why religion is all about fear. Damnation, hell, fire, and brimstone. You need to come here and be saved. It's because fear controls. Advertising is all about fear. If you don't buy this brand of beer, the girls won't like you, and you'll be standing alone at the beach, just like that guy you saw on the film that bought the wrong kind of beer. It all is about our fear, what we're afraid of, and we get manipulated all the time by our fears.
It seems that fear has never been more exposed, at least in my lifetime, than it is now.
Yes, I would agree with that. When I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I would tell my parents, I'm going to take a bike ride. And they'd say, okay, be home by dinner time. Right. I'd go out and pedal around all over the neighborhood. I'd go 15, 20 miles away sometimes and back and visit friends and go places. And they didn't ask me. They didn't question me or anything else. I had to be home by dinner time. If I was late for dinner, then they'd start to worry. And if I was more than 2 hours late for dinner, they'd really worry. But I knew that, so I didn't ever press that. I always got back for dinner time. But these days, a 6-year-old child, gets more than 10 feet away from his mother, it's almost a catastrophe.
And they're wearing a GPS. Right?
Yeah, and sometimes a leash. And exactly. Yeah. There's so much fear now that didn't exist then. Fear is just, runs many people's choices. We're afraid of almost everything. And again, what you fear, you create.
Right.
So those very things that everybody's afraid of, they start to see them happening. Well, they're creating all that dysfunction. Right. They're driving themselves nuts with their fear, basically, and they're creating the situations that they fear. But fear is what everybody who wants to manipulate you does. The law. Well, if you do this, we'll put you in jail for 20 years. If you do that, we'll hang you, and whatever. It's fear, manipulating people by fear. And it is the worst way to, it's the worst social action that you can possibly do, is to use fear as a manipulator, because you may get your way by manipulating people with fear, but you cause an underlying dysfunction that will come back and bite you later.
Well, look at the world.
Exactly. Look at the world that we're living in. It's come back and bitten us now.
In every direction.
Yes, in every direction. But you see, sometimes people have to get hit between the eyes with a 2x4 before they'll wake up and see that there's a problem.
Yeah, totally.
And that's kind of where we started. Sometimes this dysfunction has to happen what do they call it? The dark night of the soul. You know, sometimes you have to get down at the bottom of your barrel, know where else to go, and before you begin to offload all the crap that's drug you down there, and then you kind of get born again. You know, that's the idea. So yes, we are a lot more aware of our fear and our dysfunction right now than we were 50 years ago. It's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good that we're more aware of it. It's bad that we have all this dysfunction, but it is a wake-up call.
Yeah. So can I ask you some personal stuff?
Sure.
You've had, obviously, you've journeyed a lot into other attentions. Do you have a goal, a personal goal outside of what you're doing for the world, in this world, a personal goal with your attention past the moment of death?
Past the moment of death?
Past the moment of physical death. Are you preparing yourself for awareness past the moment of physical death?
Oh, well, in a way, yes. And so is everybody in a way, yes, whether they know it or not. And that is what I'm trying to do here is evolve the quality of my consciousness, make good choices and make effective choices that are on the side of love and being helpful. And by doing that, I increase the quality of my consciousness, which means the next time after this body dies and I go get a new one, I'll start at a little higher level than I started this time. By higher level, I mean a little higher quality of consciousness, because you restart with your next lifetime. I call it an experience packet because I like to get away from all the old words that have, a lot of nonsense tied to them. So rather than incarnation, I say experience packets. Yeah. So you get your next experience packet at the quality that you last earned from the last time. So yes, so what I'm trying to do is grow up here as much as possible, because that makes me as much as possible a part of the solution and takes me out of being a part of the problem. And when I reincarnate again or get to the next experience packet, I will start at whatever I earned this time. That's where I start. So it's just the part of the evolutionary process. So once you're aware of it, it's not only that you're aware, okay, this is a virtual reality, but the point is that this is a virtual reality with a purpose. This is a virtual reality where individuated units of consciousness get to make choices that matter. And that matter means that they either evolve or de-evolve based on the quality of those choices, based on the consequences. So that's what we're here for. And if you know what the game is, you're a much better player than if you're just wandering around clueless, on the playing field and don't have any idea what the game is.
Right.
Well, now you're not very good at it. So I know what the game is. So I try to play it as well as I can, making good choices at the being level. Again, it won't help to change behavior. It's not about acting. You got to grow up at the being level, not just act like you're grown up at the intellectual level. You got to really be it, or it's of no value. You don't lower your entropy by being clever. You lower your entropy by being love. You see, so yeah, that's what I'm doing. And yes, it will help me next time. And the times before, and the time before that, the last couple of times in my experience packets, I was doing things that helped me be ready for this one. And I suspect that this is going to help me be ready for the next one, because the more you evolve, the more value you can be, the more helpful you can be next time. Right. You know more, you've experienced, you've grown up some, you can be more effective in your work of helping other people grow up as you grow up yourself. So yeah, that's what's going on. So yeah, I'm kind of feathering my nest for the next time, in a sense of trying to grow up, but in another sense, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just doing my best choices, and then whatever happens, happens. Right. I'm just trying to grow up. That's really the main thing. It's not really because of the future. It's just because that's the right thing to do, and you don't need any more reason for it than that. It's just the right thing to do, so I'll do it until I can't do it anymore, and then I'll stop, and then I'll get to do it again later, just depending on what the needs are at the time.
And I guess as you grow up, you see possibilities also evolve, because it seems that
yes,
that possibilities are kind of part of the process here.
Absolutely. As you grow up, your decision space gets bigger and bigger. Your reality that you live in gets bigger and bigger. And by decision space, that's your choices. Those are the possibilities, all the possible things that you might do and affect, and how you might do and affect them. So you find yourself living in a larger reality with a much larger, richer set of possibilities, choices.
Right.
So before you grow up, you're just kind of trapped in this little physical reality. You're here in this virtual reality and everything's physical and you're physical, and you don't even know that that consciousness, is really something else in another reality frame that's non-physical to us. We don't have any of that awareness or what we're here for or anything else. We're just going through the motion. We're kind of trapped here in a little picture. But then as you grow up, you get a bigger picture and you understand more. And now when you talk to people, you're a parallel processing. You're just not in this reality. You're talking to them like I'm talking to you, but at the same time, I'm processing in other frames other than just the physical frame where you're up on my computer screen and we're talking. As you say things, I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and I do that partially by connecting with your mind and what you're thinking and how you're feeling and what really are you trying to ask when you ask a question. So I'm working on that through a connection between us. Also, I'm getting data for the answers also intuitively that filter in at the same time. And you can work in multiple reality frames all at the same time. So you just live in a bigger space. So it's not like you can either be here or you can be there, right? I'm either in the body or I'm out of the body. It's not like that. That's the way it is at the beginning. Two separate worlds, two separate places, one at a time. But eventually you just live in a bigger reality. And the things that you can connect to, the information you get, the understanding you have, all is just part of this bigger reality that you live in. And it's not a here or a there. It's all connected. And all these things that used to be paranormal have just become normal. They're just stuff that you get. It's just part of your day. Synchronicity is just part of your day. You don't, these aren't major events. So it's just, yes, your decision space grows, your reality grows, the information you're dealing with grows, your understanding grows, and all of this becomes one thing that you live in rather than a bunch of different places you can visit. So that's what happens when you grow up. Well, that makes you more effective as far as being able to talk to people, being able to explain to people. The critical thing in communication is not what you understand, but saying something that the other person can understand. You have to know where their mind is, where their attitude is, what they understand, and then you have to tell them something that's just within their reach
Right.
of what they already know. Because if you tell them something that's beyond their reach, they won't get it.
Right.
They'll just look at you and you'll just look like you're stupid, because they won't understand what did that, that's off the wall. They won't know. So you can't really communicate with people if they think you're stupid. So you need to make sure that you don't say too much and you don't say too little. You just want to say things that they can comprehend and deal with and get. And that's the key in communication, good communication with people. If all you do is tell them what you know, well, that's just arrogance, all about me. Or let me tell you everything I know, and your eyes would roll up in your head after about 5 or 10 minutes, and it'd be like, this guy's a maniac. I don't get it. I don't know what he's saying, and you'd be bored and want to turn it off very quickly. But that's not the point. It's not communication and telling somebody else what you know, filling them in so they'll be as smart as you are. That's just arrogance. So it's getting in their space. And you can't do that unless you actually can get into their mind, into their space, and see what it is they're thinking. How are they feeling? What are those things that you're telling them? How are they reacting to that? What does it mean to them? And then you can give them just the right amount of information, not too little, not too much. So that's the key, and that's the big thing in communication. So the bigger your reality gets, the better you get at communication, the better you get at being able to talk to people and actually have them understand what it is you're trying to say.
Right. You see their patterns of thought, and then you can actually start to maybe kind of, expand on things that they understand. That's
Yes.
that's my way of relating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the way it is. So it helps you be more effective by growing up. Actually, it does. When you grow up, there are a lot of things happen. One, you stop trying to control things. You just let things be. You stop trying to control other people. You stop trying to make the future turn out the way you want it to be. You are more accepting of things and give more respect to people who disagree with you. But the key thing that happens is you get a lot happier. Your life becomes fun. Your life is a joy to live. It's something that is positive. You feel satisfied. You feel like you're doing the right thing, even if it's hard. Sometimes things are hard. Sometimes choices are hard. Like my wife, if makes a choice, okay, go ride the motorcycle if you want to. That's okay with me. And then I get run over by a truck. Okay, then that was a tough choice, and maybe it turns out badly for her. You see, but it's not that all the choices get easy, but you get much better at dealing with them. Okay, well, that's what happened. Now let's go on. You don't sit and wallow around in your self-pity and do things like that that are dysfunctional. So your life becomes a fun ride, talking to interesting people, doing fun things, feeling like you are being part of the solution and not part of the problem. And it helps you actually care a whole lot more about other people, because instead of seeing everybody else as somebody you have to deal with in a way that means you have to manipulate them to, either to get out of your way or to be the way you want them to be, you just let everybody be. And you start to see them as just like yourself. They're trying to do the best they can with what they got. What they got is a certain amount of quality of consciousness, a certain amount of information, a certain amount of beliefs and fears and other stuff. And they're juggling all that stuff and trying to do the best they can with what they've got. And I'm not doing anything different than that. I've got a different set of things, and you've got a different set of things, and everybody has a different set of things of what they've got, but we're all trying to do the best we can with whatever it is we've got. So now you look at those people who you think are part of the problem, and you can have some compassion for them. They're struggling. They're trying to do the best they can with what they've got. Well, they're making some real poor decisions. They're greedy. It's all about them, etc. But that's where they are in their path. It's unfortunate. You feel bad for them in the sense that they could be so much happier. They could be so much more fulfilled if they just let that crap go. But they're not going to let it go. So you're not going to go over there and give them a lecture about how to let their crap go. That's not going to help. That just makes it worse. So you just have to let it be. So you learn to let a lot of things be, and that means you're not really so worried. You never get twisted up around the axle about things and about what other people are doing or saying. It's just okay. So your life becomes less stressful, and it becomes a happy place, even amidst all the stuff that's going on. Like we started, wow, what do you think about all this crap that's going on? Well, I don't think a whole lot about it. It's just the way it is. Maybe it'll lead to a good thing. I look for the silver lining. Yeah, it might just turn out to be a good thing, just to get people thinking in a, God, we got to make changes kind of mind, just when the change comes along that they could grab hold of. So that's kind of the way I live my life. But yes, it is a different space with a bigger decision space and more choices, but you still have challenges. You still have, wherever you are in this evolution game, your choices are always challenging. You don't get to a point where there is no challenge anymore. There's always bigger fish to fry, right? Okay, you've got those little fish taken care of now. Okay, now you got to deal with bigger fish. You got to do bigger things. You have to be more helpful, and it's all challenging. You do it the wrong way, and you lose your opportunity, and it's gone. So it's a game. It's like a puzzle. How do I do this the best way? How do I make good decisions so I really can optimize my contribution? That's the game. And as you do things and this is not working out too well, you have to shift that strategy to something else. And it's a fun game to be in. And I'll try to do my best, but I'll do better next time probably, because I'll have learned something from this time. And yeah, it's a happy life, not a miserable, scary life. That's the best thing. So if you really feel negative, you feel anger, you feel upset, you feel stressed, you feel anxiety, you feel, oh no, you've got all this stuff going on in you, that makes you unhappy, gives you ulcers, makes you unhealthy, you know, makes you not even very nice to be around, because all you can talk about is negative stuff, complain, you know, and bitch. All these people who are screwing it up for all the rest of us, bitch. And all that negativity is just a downer for everybody. And that's not good. That'll make you sick, give you ulcers, probably give you cancer. And it's so much better just to let it all go and be how it is, and be happy about whatever it is you can contribute. You don't have to be happy about the dysfunction. You just have to accept that, because it is the way people are. But you can be happy about what you're trying to do about it and do the best, and you can't do anything more than that. So you don't feel guilty that you haven't done everything. You just do what you can do. So it's a happy place.
I think that's one of the worst fables that has been imposed upon humanity, is that we're all supposed to end up in bliss. That you know what I mean? That's the goal, is bliss. Whereas I think, like you were saying, that challenge can be an exciting, invigorating thing, not a fearful, heavy, dark thing. And I think if we look upon it all as an endless evolution of discovery, that would turn it all right around into being something.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. An endless, you know, evolution of discovery. That's what we're doing here. And it's really the game is a neat game, and it's really a fun game to play. And it's good if you can level up every once in a while, you know, and your character. It's a nice game to play. So it's fun. I don't have a, you know, and some people have this negative attitude. Oh, it's just a virtual reality. That means nothing matters. You know, I could just do anything and nothing matters. I can rape, pillage, and steal and whatever. And who cares? It's just a game, sort of like playing, what's that nasty game where you're a mobster in Chicago or someplace.
There's a lot. Most of them are nasty, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of them are. You know, but it's not. You know, but the thing is, that's just the opposite of what's true. Once you understand this is a virtual reality, and that the point is to grow up, and that what you're doing here is evolving the quality of your consciousness, just doing things that aren't nice is de-evolving yourself. Next time, you get to start in a hole that you dug for yourself this time. And if you dig another hole even deeper next time, you'll have an even deeper hole. And you're just de-evolving yourself, becoming always a part of the problem and never a part of the solution. And your life will just be miserable, unhappy. You'll be struggling always. Nothing will seem to work out. And you'll be one of those people that's always desperate and on the edge of it's not worth living. And that's just because, you know, you're not trying. You don't know what the game is about. So when you know it's a virtual reality, and you know that what you're here to do is evolve the quality of your consciousness, then wow, that makes everything so much easier.
So it's just a matter of maturity of lifetimes, I imagine, because by reading your book, when you were a young man, you said that you weren't anything special, and I agree, no one's special, but obviously you had a proclivity. You've matured enough that this knowledge had clarity in coming to you at a very young age, whereas some people go a lifetime without even being aware that it even exists in this lifetime. Yeah.
That's true. You know, I was one of those kids that when I was 6 or so, I'd kind of wander around in a trance state, you know, doing chants that just I made up in my mind. They just seemed right to me. And, you know, my sister every once in a while would give me a thump to say, wake up. What are you doing? Pay attention
Back
here.
To reality.
But I would tend to be like that. I was a very right-brained kid when I started. But I knew that I had to develop to become a very left-brain scientist. That was part of my mission. I had to do that, and that was a struggle. It was a big struggle because you don't go from right brain to left brain very easily. So I started out extremely right brain and
dogmatic, right?
Yeah, well,
I mean, in your leftness.
Yeah, the right is this holistic thing. Right. The left is logical process. Right. So to do math, you need logical process. Math is just logic, is all it is. And it's a logic of quantity. That's math. So you need logical process. And boy, I struggled and struggled and struggled with that because my mind didn't work that way. I wanted to understand, well, what does it mean? What's the whole picture here? What's this math trying to do? And of course, that's the wrong question in math. Question in math is how do we go from this step to the next step to the next step to the next step to where you want to go? It's a different way of thinking. And I struggled with it until somewhere in graduate school, it all got easy. And then I was extremely left-brained and extremely right-brained at the same time. And at that point, the right brain and the left brain learn to work together. So you'd use your right brain whenever you need intuitive and holistic big picture stuff, and you'd use your left brain whenever you needed analytical, logical processing stuff. And the two were very cooperative and worked with each other.
Well, that was wasn't that what transcendental meditation did for you? It was the exercise of melding, of aligning.
Yeah, it brought that to my attention. Yeah, it brought that to my attention because I'd been right brain. Then here I am, a physicist. So I go through college and I go through graduate school, and I'm in graduate school. Now I'm very left brain, and the right brain's kind of out the door. I'm not paying any attention to the right brain anymore because I've already defined it from my left brain as being useless. You can't depend on that right brain intuition stuff. That's useless. So then I get this experience where the right brain debugs my computer code for me, and I say, it's not useless. It's really important. It's another part of reality that is important. So yeah, that kind of brought it all home, that there was this another whole dimension to existence that I didn't know anything about. And here I'm a physicist, and what I do for a living is model reality. And there was a whole chunk of reality I didn't even know existed until then. And that was not the objective side, but the subjective side and the mental side. So that was a big aha moment, which brought all the right brain stuff kind of back into view. Oh yeah, I used to be able to do all that sort of thing. I left that go, and now I brought it all back. So that kind of made me whole again, rather than very right and then very left. I combined the two. Yeah, and I was lucky because all that happened to me when I was still 20-something. So I got a very early start on it.
Yeah. And do you find you still are open to new things coming into you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have to be.
Yeah, for sure.
One of my biggest mottos, I guess you could say, things that I say over and over in my book, is that you have to be open-minded, but you also have to be skeptical. You need both of those. You have to be really open-minded, because if you're not open-minded, you won't get any new information. You won't have any aha moments. You won't learn anything that's important if you're not open-minded. All you'll do is the same old will just keep regurgitating around in your head. So you got to be open-minded to new ideas, but at the same time, you've got to be skeptical. And the person you have to be most skeptical of is yourself. You got to be very skeptical. Otherwise, you'll walk down la lane thinking you're doing something that's significant, and it'll all be just a game somewhere in your head that doesn't really make any difference. So you have to be both. And that's the only way that I know of to progress, to grow through experience, is to be open-minded and skeptical.
So where's your reference point to know that it wasn't nonsense and that it was something useful? What's your reference point, your internal reference?
The reference point is in my books what I call tasting the pudding. Your reference point, you have to say, well, what is this doing? You won't know it just intellectually. If you just think about it and try to decide whether it's useful, no, you can't do that. You can't do that at all. You can do it better intuitively than you can intellectually, but even intuitively, you're going to come up short. What you do is look for evidence that it's doing something useful. So what I learn and what I know, does it help me better help other people? Does it help me be part of the solution? Is it something that broadens my perspective, and that perspective is useful? It's like traveling. 100 years ago, a lot of people never got more than 20 miles away from where they were born, because walking and riding horses were expensive and walking was slow. So people kind of stayed around where they were born and never got out much. But some people traveled, rich people traveled, and they travel all around. And the difference between those rich people who had traveled and the people who never did is that one was very parochial, very narrow in their viewpoint, and the other had a much bigger perspective about what reality in the world was like. Well, that's the difference. Now, if those people who traveled could make use of that, if having that bigger perspective was something that was valuable to them as far as making their choices and decisions, and it usually was, because now they could see bigger pictures of things, more choices, then good. It was a good thing to do. So you don't have to intellectually decide that travel is a good thing. Can you apply it? Does it work? Is it helpful? You know, taste the pudding and see what it tastes like. So that's the same way with anything I'm doing in my mind. So if I'm going out of body and I'm doing things, the question is, you know, I'm making all this up. Is it just a game inside my head, or is it profitable? Does it have some sort of value? Can I apply it? Is it making me, you know, somehow a better person, giving me more choices, giving me some kind of clarity or perspective that is useful? And if the answer is yes, then okay, it's a good thing to do. If the answer is no, then it's like, well, is that just because I haven't done the right things or used it the right way or seen it the right way? And then you can worry with that and, you know, work on that a little bit. And if it's still no, then throw it away. Get rid of it. Doesn't matter how much fun it was or how interesting it was. You know, you just throw it out because it doesn't seem to have any value. So the question about things like this isn't, is it real? You know, was that out of body real or was it not real? Bad question. There's nothing more real than information. It was information. Okay. The real question is, was it useful? What can you do with it? How did it make you grow? You know, and if it didn't, throw it away. And it doesn't matter, you know, where it comes from.
Yeah.
If it came out of your imagination and it helps you grow up, wonderful, use it.
Right.
If it came not out of your imagination, but out of, you know, some voice in the blue, and it didn't help you grow up, well, throw it out. Doesn't matter where it comes from.
Right.
You know, if God himself talks to you and tells you something and it doesn't work out and it doesn't make you any smarter person, it doesn't give you anything, throw it away. It doesn't matter, because maybe it was somebody just pretending to be God himself, you see. So you always have to make your own choices, your own assessment of whether it's good or not, but always stay open-minded. And some of the stuff that I may have thrown out earlier, oh, I'll bring that back in later because I've learned some stuff.
Right.
You see, so you never, nothing is almost nothing is a 1 or a 0. You know, a 1 is absolutely, that's the truth and it'll never change, or a 0, absolutely not the truth and never change. Few things fall into that basket. Most everything else is somewhere in between, and it should stay that way. So you're always open to change and possibilities. And any theory, I mean, mine's a theory. It's a theory of everything, but it's really a theory of consciousness that ended up doing better physics. It's a theory, but theories have to change. Theories have to be alive.
Right.
You know, if you say this isn't a theory, this is law. Well, Newton tried that, you know, a few hundred years ago and found out that that didn't work out very well. All the things he said were laws turned out not to be laws at all. So we in physics don't talk about laws anymore. We don't talk about proof. We talk about evidence. Right. And we talk about theory. So every theory that's any good has to be open to change.
So how's yours evolved since the book?
Oh, it's evolved a lot. You know, when I wrote it, when I published it in 2003, February 2003, I had what I thought was a good theory of consciousness. And I knew from my experiments in the non-physical that consciousness was fundamental and the physical reality was not. Okay, so consciousness was primary, the physical reality was not primary. And I knew when I published it that the physical reality was a virtual reality and it was a creation of consciousness. So all of that I understood, and that was my theory of consciousness. But it wasn't until about 2 years after I published it that somebody said something to me on a different subject altogether that just triggered an aha moment in my mind that, oh, that explains quantum mechanics. Geez, why didn't I see that before? I'm a physicist. I should have seen that, but I didn't see it. So then I said, well, if I can understand quantum mechanics, which no physicists will all tell you they don't understand quantum mechanics. It's a weird science. It's not understandable. But I understood quantum mechanics now. I could see it from a virtual reality perspective and see how it worked. I could compute the answers with just logic, not with mathematics.
Right.
So So then I said, well, what else might I be able to do with the same principles that define my theory of consciousness? If they explain that, I said, what about relativity? Because relativity and quantum mechanics, they're the two big things in physics. That basically wraps all of modern physics up. So I thought about that for about a day and a half, and bingo, there it was. I knew exactly why speed of light has to be a constant. It just is trivial. Every virtual reality has a constant upper speed, and that's that you can only go 1 pixel for 1 delta t. 1 delta t is your time loop, and you have a delta x, which is your distance, and every delta t, you can only move 1 delta x. Otherwise, if in 1 delta t you can move 10 delta x, well, now you're teleporting.
So this is the stable reality you're talking about?
This is any reality.
Right, any stable reality.
Any virtual reality.
Okay.
Even World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has an upper speed limit for it has a time loop where it updates where things are and what they're doing, and it has a distance, how things move, and if you take that delta x and divide it by that delta t, that is the upper speed limit in that virtual reality. So every virtual reality, even World of Warcraft and The Sims, have an upper speed limit by which things cannot move any faster than that. Yeah, that's all it is. It's just a virtual reality. Of course, c is a constant. What else could it be? You see, that's 1 delta x for 1 delta t. It's as fast as things can go. They can't go any faster than that because the time loop, in this reality, just this reality. Now, our clock in this reality is our own clock. Right. This reality has its own delta t and its own delta x, and those things are picked in order to be give us the resolution. So your delta t, delta x is basically your resolution in time, your resolution in space. So we call that a quantum. It's a quantum of time and a quantum of space. Okay, so 200 or 300 years ago, before we had atom smashers and was doing a lot of looking at molecules and atoms and things like that, we didn't need a whole lot of resolution. So the delta x over delta t ratio, which was the speed of light, we tried to keep that the same. We didn't want that to change because that's one of those constants that we have to keep just the same. Okay, that's one of those that's important. And you can't keep it exactly the same if you want to increase the resolution, because these things are all digital. The ratio won't be exactly the same because you have to move this by a certain number of increments, pixels. You see, you can't just take a half a pixel or something to make the ratio come out right. So you have to move it. Say, now that we're going into the 1920s and we're looking deeper into small things, we need more resolution. So we have to change. The delta t has to get smaller and the delta x has to get smaller, but we want to keep the ratio the same. Well, we pick a delta x and a delta t that gets the closest as we can within the fact that these are digital things and we can't get in middle of increments. And sure enough, scientists have found out that the speed of light has changed. It's changed 4 or 5 times, and it will change just a little bit out in the last decimal place, just a little bit, but it's changes in a way that is bigger than the error of the measurement. So it knows it's a real change because the measurement error is smaller than the change that they're seeing. So sure enough, they've seen several times that the speed of light has changed just by a hair. Well, that's why. It's increasing the resolution of the game because the players are starting to need more resolution. So that's why that happens that way.
Cool. That's like what we were talking about earlier about how the consciousness of the collective affects the game in your terms, affects the reality of
yes,
your collective reality.
Yeah, because they were digging in deeper and deeper into smaller and smaller things. The virtual reality had to have a higher resolution in order to show those things they were digging into.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So so that was able to tweak, that constant was able to tweak it a little bit in order to raise that resolution. Now, the smaller the delta t and the delta x get, then the easier it is to raise them again and keep that c even less jumping around because now we got smaller pixels. So you see, it gets better and better. So we can see the first things were the biggest errors. And then as time goes on, and each time it gets better and better and better, because the pixels, it gets more tuned because the pixels are smaller and smaller. Therefore, you can keep that ratio more close to being exactly the same.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's, explains things. So that's what I've done. I've gone through all of the paradoxes in physics, all the things like, yeah, we know that's the way it is, but we don't have a clue why. It just works that way. From most of quantum mechanics to tunneling to Zeno effect to, what happened before the Big Bang. How did that ball of plasma get there? Because if our universe is all of reality, then our universe didn't exist yet. Our universe came out of that ball of plasma, but that ball of plasma had to predate our universe. And where did it come from if our universe defines all reality? You see, that's one of these paradoxes in physics. They know if they start with that assumption, they can work out the evolution of the universe, but they don't know how to start with those initial conditions. You see, it doesn't play well, because they think that they define that reality, our physical reality, is all the reality there is.
Right.
So there's a problem. So that's one of those things. Well, if it's a digital Big Bang and it's just on a computer, well, that solves that problem. That's where it came from. It was initial conditions set in the computer. So I went to all of these things in physics, and every one of them, just one after the other fell through and into a solution. Oh, that's why that works. That's why that works. So it all fell out. And you're talking about, did I change it much since it was published? Yeah, I added all that physics, got added to it. And not a lot of it's in my books. A little bit of it's in my books, but most of it is going to be on YouTube, where I talked about these things. I like to keep the books more simple and focused on big picture stuff and not so much into science, because if I do that, I'll drop off another whole bunch of readers who won't find it readable. Right. So I didn't go back and add it much to the books, just very superficially.
Have you thought of doing just a technical paper?
I have. I've done a technical paper, and as far as the physics experiments go, I set up a bunch of quantum mechanics experiments that would produce a lot of very strong evidence for this being a virtual reality and for consciousness being the computer. So there's actually like 17 experiments, but they're in groups of like 5 different groups. So there's like 1 and 1A and 1B and 1C and 1C1 and 1C2. And there's all this stuff, but there's like 17, 18 of them. I don't remember exactly, but there's really in 5 groups. And all of these experiments, I'd like to get done. So what I did is I presented them in 2016 at LA. So if you go to my YouTube channel and go in MBT-LA, MBT-LA, I think, these will come up and you'll see my talk that I presented all these experiments. Then I started working on a physics paper, something that could be published in a physics journal and peer reviewed. Because if you don't have that, then you're not legitimate. Right. You're just some quack out in the sidelines making a lot of noise. So I did that with some help with some guys who were there. There's a guy from Jet Propulsion Laboratory, physicist, and there was a guy from UCLA who was a mathematician, but his math was pretty much applied math, and it was right in a field that was, when I talked about you take the random draw from the whatever, he was a guy who was into statistics and so on, and it fit his own theories very well. So he did a lot of the putting it into the format that was necessary, to make it a good paper. They have very strict format requirements on academic things. So he had all that software for getting the format right and whatever. So the 3 of us, we talked about it and we did that, and we put some of those experiments, kind of the basic ones. We didn't do all of them, but some of the basic ones we put in there. Put it up for peer review. Peer review said it was good stuff, and now that was published last summer, summer of 2017. So now that's out there in a Journal of Quantum Foundations. Pretty good journal, actually, pretty high quality journal. So we've got that, and now all it takes to get them done is some money. So I'm going to go up, do a Kickstarter thing here in another month or 2, trying to raise the money to be able to fund the doing of the experiments.
Cool.
It's just like everywhere else in academia, you know, money talks. And if you don't have any money, well, I'm sorry, we just can't all stop work on what we're doing and go do your task and let our grants go and, you know, go do your task because it's a nice thing to do. They need money. So we're going to try to raise some money to get those done. And if they get done, then, and if they work the way I hope they'll work, then that will start an evolution in science, and not just physics, but all science will, and it'll basically get rid of materialism. Now, it's not going to do that right away. People aren't going to look at the experiment and say, oh, that's nifty. Okay, materialism's gone. You know, they won't do that because materialism isn't a concept to them. It's a belief. It's a deeply held belief, and you can't wrest a belief out of somebody very easily.
Right.
So it isn't going to happen right away. It's going to take time before we get there. But it could be the beginning of a whole new way of looking at reality, because it'll say, this is a virtual reality. Look, here's the experiments that show it. All right, if it's a virtual reality, and the way that I explain the experiments and how they work the way they do, it's pretty clear that consciousness is the computer. And that's just a logical step. Once you realize it's a virtual reality, when you start to think about, well, what's the logical possibilities for how this virtual reality could come about and the way it works, and you understand how how virtual reality works, consciousness as a computer is the only logical choice you have. You know, everything else is ridiculous. So you get consciousness as a computer, and if you get consciousness as a computer, why? Why would consciousness produce this virtual reality? And the only thing that's logical out of that is it's an entropy reduction trainer for a digital consciousness system. It's all about information. And then that brings us to, well, why would it do that? And what's the point? Consciousness evolution. What's the point in anything? It evolves. You either die, or you evolve. So conscious system wants to evolve. How does it do that? It has to lower entropy. How does it do that in a social system? By being cooperative, by caring, by loving. That's how you do it. So all that comes together. So right out of these experiments, bing, 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 3 logic steps, and you end up with what our purpose here is to learn to love and care and cooperate. That's why we're here. Right. And if we get that on an internet out to a couple of billion people, that could make a big change in attitudes. Even just the first step of saying it's a virtual reality, which says our reality is a subset. Our physical reality is a subset of something bigger and more fundamental, and something that is non-physical to us. Boom, that's a big idea. That will take, of its own, probably, 2 or 3 years just to settle into the collective psyche. But now we're talking about changes that could lead us to a whole sea state change in attitude about why we're here and what the point is.
Right.
And when we do that, right at the point where everybody's saying, gosh, we got to change. Look how awful this world is that we're living in. Look how it sucks. Oh, it's just a representative of us. It's just the way we are. Okay, I get it, and things could change. So when we started the conversation, that's what I was talking about when I said that it's possible that within the next couple of decades or so, we could see massive changes going on. And we may take them to the rest of the century before it all matures and it all works out to as good as it's going to work out. But we could see some pretty big things happening just in a couple of decades if it works out this way. Well, of course, it could go south on us too, because as soon as
ever the skeptic, eh?
Yeah, it could go south on us, because as soon as the scientists say, well, there's something non-physical that is a superset to us, there's going to be this big scramble to own whatever that is.
Right.
So, oh yeah, that's my God, that's my God is doing that. He's the programmer. No, my God's a better programmer than your God. And, we could devolve into some kind of nonsense like that, but I'm hoping that's not the way it goes, that the people are ready for some real change, not just shuffling the decks around on a Titanic, but some real change. And if they are, they won't settle for that. They'll want to look deeper than more power brokers trying to grab the power when it goes into flux.
Well, this is the last area that I always wanted to get into with my interviews and with you. And I won't make it too long, because I know we're getting a little bit late here, I guess. But
there's no time limit.
Okay.
We're here until you run out of questions.
Okay. Is that what's happened? It seems to me is that, like you say, everyone's created their own collectives. The science collective,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're trying to send a virus into that program and to right, and to permeate it and change its whole, mutate it. You're trying to mutate.
Right.
But to mutate it, you have to actually bring in philosophy, if you want to call it philosophy, because philosophy won't become philosophy anymore, because it won't be separate from science, from everything else. Metaphysics, whatever you want to call it. It's everything's been separated and turned into its own little dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that even with people, for instance, this is what I was going to bring up with you, is that I get to talk to all the people that I find are interesting in some way, and have done what you've done. They've become a being, and with their being, they've taken their perspective into a direction, and they've refined it to a level of sophistication that they're no longer the consensus.
Mm-hmm.
But they are the cutting edge of where the consensus has potential to be.
Right.
So I'm always curious, like, for instance, these paintings here is another person that I interview quite a bit, and he's someone that's a dreamer in terms of, like, Don Juan's terms. He's taken that, he's done what you've done. He's done that in that direction. He's taken his awareness to new levels and bringing back information into this awareness to share. I know a few people that are so cutting edge. Their views on YouTube get a few hundred, as opposed to Kevin O'Leary. I don't know if you know who he is. Gets 60,000. You know what I mean? He's a TV personality, right? Where these people that have information that can alter your whole perception of reality or a being get very little. So what I'm getting at out of all this preamble is just what you're doing with bringing a mathematician into your fold, and this other fellow to create a technical paper to turn science inside out in a way, or to permeate it with a new idea, cutting edge idea. Do you ever find yourself interested in what other people are doing, being a part of a collective of consciousness, of individuated beings that have taken their individuation to what I was mentioning before, to a sophisticated level of understanding?
Well, I am aware of lots of other people who are making personal progress, in this understanding, and who are also helping other people, broaden their picture. So they're becoming teachers as well. Many of them, as you say, are probably we've never even heard of, because they kind of do it on their own, and they talk to they have a small audience. They have hundreds rather than hundreds of thousands of people listening to them. But still, they're all part of the solution. They're all part of this bigger solution. It's not going to be a solution because one person is blazing a trail someplace. That's not the way it's going to work. And nobody's going to blaze one trail and all 7.5 billion of us run down that trail. It isn't going to work that way. We need it to be stated and restated in different contexts, with different metaphors, in a lot of different ways, because that will then interact with people in a lot of different ways. Some people will find this way to be very understandable and this way not, and other people will do just the opposite. So the more players we have in this game, or the more people we have gaining bigger pictures, we'll just say people that have a bigger picture of reality, the better it is. So all of these people need to, do what they can to develop themselves, their own understanding, and then communicate that to others, however they can do that. So I'm a big supporter of all of those groups, even ones that say things that I would disagree with. I'm still a supporter of them, because it doesn't matter that we have disagreement on things. That's not the point. The point is that if they are moving in the direction toward the solution, whether they have metaphors that really don't work too well for me is irrelevant. That doesn't matter. They're all moving in that direction. So I think that's terrific. So I'm aware of a lot of people doing that, and I'm pleased as I can be that they're all doing that. And it's part of the solution of having many, many paths, You know, one of the favorite things I say is there's only one truth, but there's thousands and thousands of pathways to get to that truth. And many of those pathways will seem completely incompatible with each other, but they're not really. They're just different metaphors and different ways of looking at a problem.
And that's why great minds think alike. It's because
yeah, exactly.
they're
Because they're
all
all converging, from different things. So you can have a shaman out of some, Aboriginal people, and you can have the Buddha, and you can have, any number of other people, and they're basically all converging in, toward the same path, but they talk to different audiences, which is good. That gives us a collective bigger audience. And hopefully all these other people will share my attitude that they're all wonderful. They're all part of the solution. Even though we would disagree on meaningless details, it doesn't matter. They're all headed to the same place, and they're going to bring people with them, which is very important. So I'm aware of a lot of that. I don't have a lot of time left over to spend getting too involved in it. So I appreciate it. I know it's necessary. I'd want to support it in any way that I can, but I'm up to my eyebrows in just doing my own part in my own path. And though I read these things and I read them with interest and I see, oh yeah, okay, I see where they're coming from. Good. You go, guy, you go, girl, keep working this stuff. It's good. But I can't really, it's not like I send them an email and want to get together or let's all meet or something. I don't think that's important. I think what's important is that they keep working. They keep doing what they're doing. I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And the point is, it's not, what's important is when we get to that point where we're at a tipping point where the masses, the masses, humanity sees, God, we got to do something else. This isn't working. What else can we do? Oh, here's some other stuff over here we can do. And even if there's 100 different things that all seem like they're incompatible, it won't make any difference. Because as they start down that path, it'll all start to come together and be the same thing eventually. So it doesn't matter. It just, we need something out there for them to do, something that attracts their attention, something they see that's a better way. And all of these things have to do with caring, have to do with love, have to do with getting rid of fear, all of them that are real things, really headed to the solution. They're all saying similar sorts of things. That's it's primary, consciousness is primary, physical world is not, and they're all going the same place. So even if we have totally opposite viewpoints of the details, it's irrelevant. It's all going to help so that we get to this point where people are looking for something else. There needs to be something else for them to find, because if they give up on what we got but don't have anything else to go to, that's called chaos. And chaos and the breakdown of civilized society and all the rest of it could set us back to where instead of another couple decades, it may be another couple of centuries before we get there. So we need to have a solution at the time when the people need a solution, which is getting closer and closer now. That's why I say maybe in another couple of decades, because the awareness that we need another solution, that what we have isn't working, is pretty palatable now. You don't have to talk to too many people who would agree with that. If you just talk to people, say, do you agree that the way things are now just sucks and we need a better way? You'd probably get a 98%, yeah, I agree with that, no matter where they were politically. You see, well, there are people looking for something better. And maybe they're not quite desperate enough to be real serious about something better, but they're getting there. So yes, all these groups are terrific, and they're all part of the solution. And I'm just one of them. I'm one of many plodding down that trail. Now, like we talked about before, I understand that communications has to be about what the person you're communicating understands. So that's one of my things. I have all kinds of people say, Tom, why don't you tell us about the stories? Tell us about your adventures in out-of-body worlds and things like that. And I say, no, thank you. I don't really need to, because that's not going to help you grow up any. That's just entertainment. It's nothing that's going to help you grow up. It's entertaining, and not only that, it'll hurt you, because when you go make your own explorations, you'll be biased because of what you heard me say. You need to do it on your own, not think that you have to repeat my experience. You say, or it's not right. If it's not what Tom experienced, then it must be wrong. That is just a problem. So I don't do that, because that's one of those things where you'd be telling people things that they don't really have the background to understand it. So they fantasize it into something else that suits whatever it is they do know, and now they're worse off than they were before. So I try to be careful not to share too much, just to share enough. And I think that's why, and I did that with my books. What I wanted to write in my books was the easy part, saying in a way that people could understand it and could read it and wouldn't get overwhelmed with it. That's why there's a lot of humor in it. The crack jokes all the way through it, because if you don't have a little lighten up time, then everybody's head would explode, about halfway through the second book, and they wouldn't go any further. So I try to work with people where they are. So I do have, hundreds of thousands of views on a lot of my stuff in YouTube. I do have like 40,000 subscribers and I don't know how many million views, 4 or 5 million views, something like that. So it is doing that, but that's because I've really focused on trying to tell people just what they can use and what they can work with, and trying not to say other things. Otherwise, I just put myself off into the margins as somebody that you can't understand, or somebody that sounds like a lunatic. Right. And that isn't helpful. It doesn't help people. So it's not my ego. Hey guys, here's what I know. That's just ego talking. It's how can I help? What can I say to people that actually make a difference in their life? That's the key. And all these other people that are working things, I think most of them have probably figured that out too. They don't tell you everything that they've experienced or what they're doing. They're just telling you enough to get you interested to learn a little more. And that's exactly what they need to do. The people that go too far too fast end up sidelined and taken out of the picture. Now they're not really able anymore to be that big a part of the solution, because they've already been marginalized by the culture they were trying to change.
Right.
So people ask me about, well, what is it you're not telling us? And, I say, well, I'm not going to tell you that. That's why I'm not telling you. But it's probably, I talk about maybe 20% of the stuff that I experience and that I do and whatever. And the rest of it is no point. It's just not helpful to people. And it just takes me out of the ability to be useful.
Right. Relatable.
Yeah, relatable. Mm-hmm. Right. So my persona, what I'd like to come across as, is just another guy just like everybody else who's figured a few things out. That's it. I don't want to be the guru. I don't want to be, the guy who, flies around at night, and out of body places. All of that stuff is non-helpful to me. I want to be known as a scientist, a guy who uses logic, and a guy who figures it out, but he figures it out with logic, that sort of thing. But I just would like to be like everybody else, but I have some interesting things to say that are helpful. So that's kind of the persona of where I am. I avoid best I can the being in the spotlight, or being a cult of personality or that sort of thing. People keep shoving that kind of stuff at you because that's what our culture does. But it's something that's what they do. And I try to, avoid that as much as I can, because that's just not functional for what it is I want to accomplish. So I keep a low profile, I guess, in many ways, but I don't mind talking about a personal life unless it gets to the point that I'm saying more than I really need to say. And then I don't go there.
Well, awesome.
So what are you going to do with all these? You just put them up on a site someplace?
What I'm going to be doing with it is just putting it on YouTube, putting it on my YouTube channel, mm-hmm. on my website. And in the background, I'm working on a script to put all this information together in some form and have everybody speak their part of the information and make it come together in some kind of, I don't know. I feel like there's a reason why I'm attracted to all these people, and it affects my structure of my understanding. both in
Sure.
my being and in my intellectual understanding.
That's a big challenge.
It is, but it's my feels like what I'm here to do. So,
Yeah.
because I can grasp everything to the extent that I feel like I need to put it together. Do you know what I mean? In some way, some understanding. To me, you're part of the picture that a few other people complete different parts of the picture, and it becomes a whole for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I figure I'm like you were saying, we're here to share. I feel like I'm here to share. It's not just for me. My own personal thing is for me, but that information is not for me. That's why I don't charge any money, or I don't have any even advertising on my YouTube page or anything. It's because it's just a conduit. I'm just a conduit for this information to whoever
Yeah.
is linked to my energy. So
Yeah. Well, we all do what we feel we need to do, but putting that all together into a single coherent story is going to be very challenging.
yeah,
But I think that if anybody can do it, you can probably do it, because you've been called to do that, and you see that as where you're going, and it'll probably work. It won't be easy, but and maybe it'll be more than one documentary. Hard to say how it all comes out, but that'll fix itself as you do it. It will create itself.
exactly. And I know that it involves everything that I care about. I love it. I love doing it. Everything about it feels expansive and full of energy. So it just feels like the right thing to do. Yeah, I have a hard time when people ask me this, because I have a hard time expressing my own internal motivations and interests. I'm good at drawing it out of people, but I'm not very good at giving it back. So I get very stuttery when people ask me questions.
Yeah. Well, there's not really a whole lot that you have to tell, other than, this is my thing. Yeah. This is what I'm doing, and I want to pull this all together and present it in such a way that people can grow from it.
And I agree with the
bigger picture.
Exactly, but it has to start from the small picture.
Right.
For me, it starts from the small picture, that anybody can start from not knowing anything to knowing everything. That's the story I want to tell.
Well, like I say, you have to do it where you got to start where people are. You can't start where you are. You got to start where you study something for a decade, and then you start there. Well, there's not many people that are going to be able to latch onto it there. You got to start from where they are and work it up, and you can't overwhelm them. You can only take them as much as you can, only fill them to the point where they're full, and then you got to leave them alone for a while and come back and give them another dose later.
Yeah. Well, in the case of a documentary, it'll be their choice when to stop it, but I want to be able to walk them logically through each step, why it all makes sense. It just makes sense. If you accept this and how this is acceptable, then this automatically makes this thing make more sense. Just like what you're trying to do with combining the two theories of relativity and quantum mechanics, right? Mm-hmm. That's the big thing in science, is how to reconcile that with mathematics. But you can't, right? With mathematics, at this point anyways, right? It has to, you have to include something that's energetically experienced rather than written down on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Well, they are fundamentally contradictory to each other. Each one, quantum mechanics has part of what it needs to define its science is completely antithetical to relativity. Part of what relativity has to define its science is just antithetical to quantum mechanics. So the two of them they have one assumption in common, but they each have another assumption that's just totally crossways with each other. That's why, and they both work. They both work fine. So that's why Einstein and the rest of them were looking for a toe, because they knew there was something bigger that had to explain both of them, because these two were at odds. They were subsets of something bigger that would pull it all together in one understanding. So back in the 50s, Einstein was looking for that theory of everything, which would be the things for which quantum mechanics and relativity would both be a subset of something larger. And I think it's neat to realize that not only does that work, there is this bigger thing that pulls them together, but it also unifies metaphysics, philosophy, theology, psychology. All these things all get unified at the same time, to where it's not just quantum mechanics and relativity, but it's everything gets pulled into it, and we see how it all fits all in one big logical scientific structure. and it all fits in there really nicely.
And to
I think
unify paradox, exactly. To unify paradox is the ultimate knowledge, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah. Awesome. What a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's good talking with you. Well, Randall, we finally did get it together after a lot of starts and no goes because of my throat, but I didn't choke through any of this, so the editing shouldn't be such a big problem.
No, not at all. Yeah, you didn't have one cough that I noticed.
No, nothing major. I took a couple of my little cough pills. I'd feel it's starting to get a little scratchy, and I'd take a couple of those when I'd feel it starting to get a little scratchy, not waiting until it got bad enough to cough.
Right.
And that seemed to be good enough.
Just one last thing. Would you be open perhaps in the future to having a joint discussion with a couple of other people?
Sure,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very willing to be a part of your project.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So whatever it is you're doing, and if you need more, if you get to a point where you're trying to pull it all together, but you really should have asked me this question,
awesome.
because that would fill in a hole someplace.
Yeah.
Then fine, we can just come. You can do that. We can discuss it and stick that in there. So I'm open for you to come back at anything you feel like you need, and if you want a group of people together to chat about things, then awesome. I'm good with that.
Thank you. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, well, you always find out things that you wish you'd asked after it's over, right?
Well, everything you say, I can go off in 3 or 4 different directions, but I have to focus on one or else I get lost.
Yeah, that's the way it is with talking. I find when I talk to people, every time I answer a question, I create another 20 or 30 questions in the mind of the person that I just answered a question.
Right.
So it's one of those things. The questions just keep bubbling out and bubbling out. One thing throws out a whole bunch more, but
totally.
Yeah, that's the way it is. So if you find that there was something you should have asked that you didn't, then just call me back. I mean, we can talk for a half hour, an hour, whatever it is to cover those things. It's a very worthwhile project.
Awesome.
You see, we have all these things that are bubbling along now in the margins, waiting to get into the prime time. And it's good for people to be more aware that they exist, to be more aware that there are alternatives. There are other ways to live your life. There are other ways to see the world. There are ways to understand all this crap that we're dealing with. Well, it's us. We create that. And if all these understandings will help people when they get to the point of that tipping point, if you've already done your thing and it's out there, well, that's part of the little thing there that's a tipping point. It's going to tip over. Yeah, it's part of it. So these are things that need to be done. And I'm very supportive of people doing these things because it's not a one-man show, or it's not even a 10-man show. Everybody has to do their little piece of it. And your piece makes my piece more effective. And my piece makes your piece more effective. And that's true with all the pieces.
Yeah, totally.
They all make each other more effective. So we have to encourage and support what everybody else is doing the best we can, and then we'll all be more effective when we get to that put up or shut up time, when people are desperate for something else and they're looking for a viable philosophy, a viable view of the world, something that doesn't make them want to commit suicide, something that wants to draw them out, then we'll be there. So this is the time.
It is. And I think you're a big part of it. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Later.
Bye-bye.